Today's episode of World Traveler is taking us to the south of France. We're going into the heart of Provence, one of the most beautiful parts of the planet. Come along as we take you to Arles, Aix, Saint-Remy, and elsewhere. We're going to start out in one of the best sights of all, the beautiful town of Arles, in the heart of Provence. They have a Roman amphitheater that's about 2,000 years old and can hold 20,000 people. It's still in use today. And you see it's being renovated. It's all cleaned off now. They're really taking good care of that 2,000-year-old structure. Arles was an important Roman town founded by Julius Caesar about 2,000 years ago. And now it's one of the most charming places in all of Europe to visit. World famous as a beauty spot, and for a while it was the home of Vincent van Gogh when he was at his final and most productive period. There's a lot of these narrow streets in Arles. There's a small pedestrian zone. There's the various squares and the cafes around it, of course, and historic sites. And we'll be showing you those highlights coming up right now as we take a walk through Arles. The old town of Arles is comfortably small. It's about a square mile, so it's very easy to see the whole thing on foot. And you can easily spend 2 or 3 days here and enjoy the different museums, historic sites, the cafes around the squares, and the restaurants, of course. A good strategy for sightseeing in Arles is simply strolling up and down these little lanes, catch their different moods during the day, and also come back in the evening. Coming into one of the main squares of town, this is Place du Forum, and it's nearby where the ancient Romans had their forum. There's a statue of Mistral in the center of the square. Frederick Mistral, he was a Nobel Prize winning poet who is a native of Arles and in fact invested his Nobel Prize money in creating a museum, a historic museum that still functions today in Arles. The center of town is fairly quiet because we're visiting in the month of November. It's very peaceful. Here's the cafe, or at least a reproduction of the cafe that Van Gogh painted, the night cafe scene. Really, just these little back lanes are so precious. You don't have to be so concerned about historic sites like great museums or major cathedrals, although Arles has those as well. But the charm of the back streets is so much of the essence of the towns of Provence, and especially here in Arles, perhaps the most beautiful of all the towns in Provence, although we'll let you make up your mind. We're going to take you to Aix-en-Provence later in the program. Many of the buildings in the town center were constructed in the Middle Ages. This is the old city hall built in 1675 to plans by the famous architect Hardouin Mansart. They have a public lobby with beautiful architecture dating back to the Renaissance, statues in the stairway alcove, the Hôtel de la Cité. It's right on a major square in the heart of town. The Église Saint-Trophime, the Church of Saint-Trophime, next to it has a fantastic Byzantine series of sculptures on the facade, and you see this high relief carving of the saints and sinners. On one side, the devils are taking the sinners down to hell, and on the other, the saints are getting their heavenly reward. This is one of the most spectacular church facades in all of Europe. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site and a Byzantine interior, older than the Gothic. The church is actually a mix of Byzantine and then later Gothic and touches of the Renaissance. The inside is quite airy. There's a lot of space in here, a high ceiling, and they've got some reliquaries and a few statues, but the interior is relatively plain. You want to be sure to go outside and around the corner into the cloister. Be sure to find it. It's a little bit tucked away, but beautiful. It's like an open-air museum with architecture and sculpture that spans a 300-year period. We're in the cloister in Arles, and it's really quite a lovely cloister. There's an interesting mix of architectural styles. We have the Gothic on this side. You can see the pointed arches. And the other half of the cloister is actually earlier with the Romanesque barrel vaulting. So it took about 300 years to construct this one cloister. It's a very calm and peaceful place. Beautiful columns with different capitals to the columns, a lot of detail. And there are some lovely statues on the corner columns in the cloister. Cloisters are always rewarding and peaceful places to visit. There's a meditative and prayerful atmosphere in a cloister like this. Anytime you see a cloister with the columns and the arcades surrounding an open square, you know that this had been at one time a residence of the clergy, perhaps a residence of nuns or priests, somebody associated with the church. Generally would be living upstairs, but it's rare to find a cloister such as this one that is so intricately decorated. The top of each column is carved, and some of the columns are really impressive works of art in themselves. Midway along, there's a major column, and then each of the smaller columns have elaborate capitals. Some of the arches are rounded, as you see here, and others are pointed, reflecting the different time periods. And in fact, this cloister is generally considered to be the most important cloister in all of Provence. And it's so easy to overlook it because it has an unmarked doorway. You'd never even know it's here unless you've studied up a little bit in your guidebooks or watching this video or heard about it somehow. It's the corner columns that are really the most spectacular of all in the cloister of Saint-Trophime. There's a statue of St. Paul. That's one of the really important art masterpieces in here. Here's some of the detailed corner statues with relief scenes. And there are some other scenes of daily life as well carved into the galleries of the cloisters. Upstairs is a space that's used occasionally for exhibits, art exhibits of various kinds. And next we'll take a walk under the ancient Roman Forum. The Forum was the center of social life in ancient Arles, and miraculously, a large part of it is still preserved underground. These barrel-vaulted arcades used to be street level, but now they are slightly underground and beautifully preserved for you to walk through today as the Cryptoporticos Museum of Arles. The function of these barrel-vaulted spaces is a little bit uncertain, but it's believed they were used for storage. They were like warehouses and also provided the foundation for the main structure of the forum up above. It's a little spooky down there. You walk down below, entering through this church, and they keep it kind of dark and it's a little dank down in the basement, but definitely quite fascinating and worth a visit. You go below the crypt of that church into the Cryptoporticos, and then back into the streets of Arles for some more strolling. There is a major history museum in Arles that is really worth walking to. It takes about 15 or 20 minutes to walk here from the center of town, and it displays a lot of the treasures from the ancient Roman period of Arles. And they have got a lot of the original glassworks, the tools, the gold jewelry, the statues, all on display here at the Archaeological Museum, and some earlier pieces that date back to the Stone Age. We have statues of the various emperors and a large 3D model of Arles in the time of ancient Rome, showing how sophisticated the buildings were. It was a major town. Here's the theater, and the theater as we see it today is really a reconstruction. Only the columns in the foreground are original. The amphitheater is quite original and still standing as it was in the time of Vespasian, who also built the great Colosseum in Rome. Here's the sarcophagi, or the tombs, of the Romans and some early Christians. The stone coffins are richly decorated with sculpture depicting daily life, and there's a large collection of mosaic floors. This lady riding the bull is called Europa. It's interesting that even 2,000 years ago they talked about Europa or Europe. Well, the elevated platforms enable you to look down on this large collection of floors. These are taken from Roman homes through archaeological excavations, and they reveal brilliant scenes created with tiny pieces of colored stones. There's other statues here depicting the emperors, various sea creatures. The Roman portrait bust was a really refined art form in ancient Rome 2,000 years ago. Nereids, the zodiac, the various seasons are represented. And here's little models of their engineering feats. They had bridges across the river here, and apartment houses. The Romans were truly amazing inventors and the world's most impressive engineers at that time, 2,000 years ago. More views of the sarcophagi. There is a major Roman burial grounds in Arles also. And also on display here are original glassworks and small statues. There's tools and gold jewelry, and we've got items dating back to the Stone Age and the Bronze Age. Here's a view of the theater. There's very little left of the ancient Roman theater, just a few columns, but the townsfolk have actually rebuilt the theater, as you see here, and they have performances, so it's built in the style of the old theater. And typically the Romans would even build a roof across the theater to protect it from the weather. These dramatic displays remind us that Arles was one of the largest economic centers in the Roman Empire, with a busy commercial harbor and an extensive urban core. More views of the amphitheater. This could hold 23,000 people. And they're doing some renovation work on it. And even in ancient Rome, you can see they were doing some renovating, ongoing maintenance. That's what's kept it standing for nearly 2,000 years. It's really the best preserved amphitheater from ancient Rome to be found anywhere in Europe today. Another view of the scale model of the town itself. They were really amazing urban planners. The streets are bustling. It's late in the afternoon. As we come out, we notice there's been a slight rainfall that stopped but created those ideal conditions of clean streets and fresh air and reflected lights. You'll see lots of friendly folks out here in the streets of Arles in the evening. It's a great time to be out for a stroll. Now we're in the south of France, and they do observe the siesta, so many of the shops are closed at 1 p.m. and 3 p.m. and then they reopen until about 8 p.m. in the evening. The weather's nice, the lights are on, the daylight is still lingering in the twilight sky beyond. It's just a perfect time for the evening stroll. This puppy was just frolicking and happy to be out in the streets, walking around with his patient master. We photographed this program during the month of November, which, as it turns out, is a great time to visit the south of France. The weather was cool but not cold, and the towns and sites were never crowded, but everything was open so you can fit in like a local. It's a good idea when you're traveling to fit in with the rhythm and schedule of the local people. In other words, don't sit down for dinner at 7 p.m. if you can avoid it, because this is a great hour to be out walking around. This is when the shops are open, locals are out strolling. It's a great time. The lighting is beautiful. You have a mix of the soft ambient lighting and the evening lights. So postpone your dinner till about 8 p.m. if possible. Here's the courtyard of another historic museum right in the heart of town. It's the Museum Arleton that was founded by Frederick Mistral. Especially lovely to be strolling after a light rainfall as we've had, where the streets are glistening and people are out strolling. The air has been refreshed. It's just marvelous. And then about 8 p.m. maybe sit down for dinner. There's a lot of different restaurants to pick from here. The colors are very intense in Provence, and the vibrant colors of the buildings change in appearance throughout the cycle of the day. Here's another view of the Night Cafe that was painted by Van Gogh. Actually, it's a reproduction. The actual Night Cafe wasn't in this exact spot, but Van Gogh did sit very often at cafes right here on the main square of town. And from one of these, he painted his Starry Nights, one of his most famous canvases. He lived in Arles for nearly 2 years, but unfortunately today there are no original paintings in the town by Van Gogh. There are some memorials to him of various kinds, however, and you can follow in his footsteps, walking again along these really, really charming little back alleys. We stayed at the Hotel Calendal right in the center of town. Arles is not a big city, fortunately. It's a small town, and most of the hotel choices you'll find here are in small hotels like this that are really charming and totally European in their ambiance and atmosphere. And you'll typically get a breakfast buffet spread included with your room price. And it's great coffee, cold cuts, cheese, maybe you'll have some eggs, breads, cereals. It's a good way to start the day. And there's always a cozy living room in these hotels, these small European-style hotels in the heart of town. And the price is really quite reasonable, especially when you're here in the off-season. And as you see, the rooms are very comfortable, a great place to stay. And then we had a chance to sit down with the manager and chat for a while, and real friendly fellow, and he's going to tell us a little bit about the surroundings and other things that we might do with our time while we're in Arles for a couple of days.
Hello, my name is Pascal Galvez, and I am the assistant manager of the Calendal Hotel in Arles, which in fact has got the charm of a private house as well as a normal hotel. So it's a very, very nice hotel due to its situation, which is right in the middle of the interesting part of Arles and the Provence. It used to be one of the biggest places during the Roman Empire, and it has been a very, very strong economical center of the Roman Empire for many years. It used to be the retirement place of the generals of the Roman army. It used to be one of the first places, one of the first commercial harbor during the Roman Empire for the Mediterranean part. We are not far away from the small places as well, like Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, which is famous for his market, and the Beau-de-Provence as well, which is a typical village from the Alpes region.
We're going to bring you on a day trip to these two charming villages. But first, let's have a quiet, peaceful stroll in the village atmosphere of Arles in the morning when life is just getting started. It's about 7:30, 8 o'clock in the morning. A couple of the cafes are open, a corner shop is open, but nothing much else is happening. There's a few people on their way to work. The town square is fairly quiet at this hour. There's some nice little hotels located around the square in this part of town. And then you can just enjoy the peace and quiet without anybody else in the way. Take a little stroll before breakfast as the town comes to life. Again, being here in November is extra peaceful. When you come in the summertime, naturally there'll be a lot of tourists in the streets any time of day. But if you're up at 7:30, 8 in the morning, any time of the year, you're going to have a nice, quiet, peaceful way to start your day. There are several very good two-star hotels located around this little plaza in this part of town with reasonable rates, including the Gauguin and the Mirador. And you could walk a few hundred yards west from here to see the ancient Roman baths of Constantine. You could look at those from the outside or pay an admission to go inside and get a closer look at it. Well, theoretically, you could cover all of Arles' pedestrian zone in about 30 minutes because the actual length of road that's set aside exclusively for pedestrians is only 1/2 mile. However, there are so many others of these small lanes and little plazas with very little traffic and great charm that are fun to explore that you could keep happily entertained here for a full day or maybe even a couple of days. The noisy face of Arles is found along the broad Boulevard des Lycées. That's a few blocks on the south edge away from this old part of town. And there they have some busy traffic and broad sidewalks. There is another fine restaurant. There are some really excellent restaurants in Arles, of course, as you would expect in France. Any town in France is undoubtedly going to have fine restaurants, no matter how small the town. French cuisine is perhaps the world's most delicious foods. Another little bit of a pedestrian lane, the Cat Standing Guard. More views of that Roman amphitheater. During the Middle Ages, the amphitheater was actually used for housing. It's so quiet, this dog is wondering who's coming down his street. Just standing guard, being friendly. Also, during the Middle Ages, a wall was built around Arles to protect it from attack and provide security, and most of that medieval wall is still intact, just as many of the buildings from that Middle Age period are still standing, as you see here today. The ancient wall encloses the space and it still protects it from undue modernization, and nothing much seems to have happened to disturb these old buildings, so the historic center still looks as it did centuries ago. Well, now we're leaving Arles. The train station in Arles is very convenient to the village. It's located less than 1/2 mile from the fortified wall of Arles, so probably your hotel is within a 1-mile distance from the train station, which makes it very convenient. You can just walk over here if you're leaving on a day trip to explore the nearby areas, as we've just been doing. Or if you're leaving town, well, you might want a taxi to bring your suitcases with you over to the train station. And it's a simple train station, just 2 tracks and a small reception area. And pretty soon you hop on a train and go. Train is always a very comfortable way to travel. First class is air conditioned, it's really smooth, and you've got this beautiful scenery outside the windows.